Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, February the 25th, 2021. In about 90 minutes at about 5:30 Pacific time, I will be discussing Michael Curtiz's 1945 film, Mildred Pierce, starring Joan Crawford. But first up, Biden administration. It's so very centrist and middle of the road. Well, the Interior Secretary is a native Indian who does not believe that Washington, D.C. is sovereign American territory. That certainly sounds centrist and middle of the road, does it not? Here's a story today from the Washington Examiner by Michael Lee. Senator Rand Paul pressed President Biden's Assistant Secretary of Health nominee, Rachel Levine, who is transgender, on the issue of genital mutilation during Levine's confirmation hearing. Quote, genital mutilation has been nearly universally condemned. Genital mutilation has been condemned by the World Health Organization, the United Nations Children's Fund, and the United Nations Population Fund. According to the WHO, it is recognized internationally as a violation of human rights. Genital mutilation is considered particularly egregious because, as the WHO notes, it is nearly always carried out on minors and is a violation of the rights of children. It is typically not performed by force, but as the WHO notes, by social convention, social norm, the social pressure to conform and do what others do and have been doing, as well as to be accepted socially, and the fear of being rejected by the community, unquote. Senator Paul continued, American culture is now normalizing the idea that minors can be given hormones to prevent their biological development of their secondary sexual characteristics. Dr. Levine, you have supported both allowing minors to be given hormone blockers to prevent them from going through puberty, as well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia, unquote. I should add, as I learned from Abigail Schreier's book, which I highly recommend on the subject. It is called Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, that when adolescent girls are given hormones, it effectively ends not only their physical but mental development. Yes, that is what has become normalized now. And of course, Senator Paul was subject to the shrieks of the woke. Paul went on to argue that many children with gender dysphoria eventually have the condition resolve on its own, asking Levine if adults should interrupt that process in minors. He said, like surgical mutilation, hormonal interruption of puberty can permanently alter and prevent secondary sexual characteristics. The American College of Pediatricians reports that 80 to 95% of pre-puberty children with gender dysphoria will experience resolution by late adolescence if not exposed to medical intervention and social affirmation. Dr. Levine, do you believe minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision of changing one's sex? Secretary Levine responded, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field. It seems to me that cutting off a girl's breasts and then freezing her physical and mental development in adolescence, as well as cutting off a boy's penis and testicles, are not what one might call very nuanced. The Washington Examiner story continues. Levine, a transgender woman who rose to prominence as Philadelphia's top health official during the coronavirus pandemic, sidestepped Paul's main questions. Nuanced field with robust research and standards of care that have been developed. If I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Health, I will look forward to working with you in your office and coming to your office to discuss the particulars of the standards of care for transgender medicine. The medical profession has been bullied into accepting the concept of gender affirmation. So if a 10-year-old girl says she's really a boy, then physicians find themselves in a dilemma. that if they say, well, have you really thought this through? Could this not be just a passing craze? Oh, how did you find out that you were actually a boy and not a girl? Oh, through Tumblr and YouTube videos, or other girls at school telling you, yes, that's what you are. Why don't you recognize this? If they bring up any of this, or, if counseling is suggested, then they're pretty much guilty of a hate crime. Not happy with Levine's answer, Senator Paul continued to press the nominee on the harm such interventions can cause to minors. He said the specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia? You have said that you're willing to accelerate the protocols for street kids. I'm alarmed that poor kids with no parents who are homeless and distraught, you would just go through this and allow that to happen to a minor. Paul then recounted the story of a 14-year-old girl who received sex-altering treatment but regretted that decision as an adult, pressing Levine to answer if she supports such interventions for gender dysphoria. Levine again sidestepped the question, opting for an answer that was an almost word-for-word repeat of her previous response. Paul pointed out that many of the drugs being used to treat gender dysphoria are not approved for that treatment. Fertility is another problem, he said. None of these drugs have been approved for this. They're all being used off-label. I find it ironic that the left that went nuts over hydroxychloroquine being used possibly for COVID are not alarmed that these hormones are being used off-label. There's no long-term studies. We don't know what happens to them. We do know that there are dozens and dozens of people who have been through this who regret that this has happened. A permanent change happened to them. If you've ever been around children, 14-year-olds can't make this decision, Paul concluded. In the gender dysphoria clinic in England, 10% of the kids were between the age of 3 and 10. We should be outraged that someone is talking to a 3-year-old changing their sex. So, Woke Capital had a response to this, that Hasbro announced that Mr. Potato Head is now, gender liquid, or whatever they call it? No, that really happened. Also, Oreo cookies, which not that long ago teamed up with Lady Gaga for a Lady Gaga specific cookie. Of course, Lady Gaga is now having a dog problem. And Oreo is owned by the Nabisco division of Mondelez International. And they decided to weigh in. Yes, trans people exist. Before we get into that, let's look at a couple of stories from Up Rocks. Before Wednesday, it had been a few weeks since we'd heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene, the new QAnon-obsessed congresswoman who kicked off her tenure by alienating anyone who wasn't a die-hard Trumpist. But back into the spotlight, she roared. First, she forcibly adjourned a vote on the AOC co-shepherded Equal Rights Act, partly by going on an anti-trans tirade. Then she got owned by AOC herself. A couple of hours later, it was made public that one of Greene's close associates admitted to being part of the failed MAGA coup of January 6th. Oh, it's a coup now. Is it? I suppose we'll have a little more to say about that later. Okay. So how was Marjorie Taylor Greene owned by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Greene had tweeted, I just made a motion to adjourn in order to give every member of Congress time to rethink destroying women's rights and women's sports and religious freedom before voting for the Equality Act. AOC responded, you could just vote no instead of trying to get out of work early. And you should probably stop using these hashtags because women's rights include trans women's. And there is a hashtag, I don't know, it looks like rabbit ears. I have no idea what it is. And then there's the now obligatory trans flag. And then there is a purple heart. what is that suggesting that trans intervention is like a war wound? Ooh, could be problematic. Okay, so Green stepped up a fight with a fellow representative and office neighbor in the most bigoted way possible. That colleague is Illinois Representative Marie Newman. She has a trans daughter. Oh, how old is this trans daughter, I wonder? And when Green called the pro-alphabet people bill an attack on God's creation, Newman decided to put up a pro-trans flag in her office, which is across the way from hers. Green then decided to return in kind, or with the addition of some prejudice. She posted a video of her putting up a sign outside her office bearing the words, "There are two genders, male and female," followed by "Trust the science," in scare quotes. That Green would proudly troll a colleague who has a trans child is probably not surprising. Before she was elected, she'd written violent things about certain Congress people. That didn't mean people weren't still disgusted with her behavior, including Adam Parcamento. Oh, he's a Democratic strategist. Yeah, okay. I recall hearing a great deal from him during the Ukraine hoax of last year. Yeah, surprising opinion from Adam Parcamento. Adam Kinzinger, and he is ostensibly a Republican congressman. This is sad, and I'm sorry this happened. Representative Newman's daughter is transgender, and this video and tweet represents the hate and fame-driven politics of self-promotion at all evil costs. This garbage must end in order to restore our GOP. Yes, the sensible centrist position is in favor of the sexual mutilation of children. Yes, that is the sensible, middle of the road position. And what a pretty pass we've come to. Let's see if I can find anything about this woman, Marie Newman. She was born in 1964. Oh, I see, a marketing consultant under personal life. Okay, she was married to her husband in 1996, and they have two children, including one transgender daughter. Oh, a story from The Nation. Marie Newman could shape the future of the Democratic Party. Okay, because she has a trans daughter. Oh, she has become an outspoken advocate for trans rights, largely because of her daughter, Evie, who was born Tyler. And when she was a preteen, she became deeply depressed. Oh, the Newmans were worried she would self-harm and found a nearby therapeutic program she could attend as an inpatient, which helped her come out as transgender, as a preteen. That means 12 or younger. Yes, this is what we mean by informed consent. Newman said that was the happiest day of her life. Was it now? Your life must have been pretty miserable before then, because it meant her daughter could be her authentic self. My daughter is trans, and over my dead body will anything happen to roll back her rights. She knows what a force I can be and what a loud mouth I have. Huh, yeah. So was she on board with this right from the very beginning? I know that some mothers are, particularly attention-seeking mothers with loud mouths, like Marie Newman. It seems to me that it was Marie Newman who first politicized the fact that she has a trans daughter. Oh, yes. Oh, Wajahat Ali. And he is, oh, yes, a Daily Beast columnist. He gives TED Talks, because of course he does. Oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene is the present and the future of the GOP and conservative movement. She is their most authentic representative. Oh, okay. Where's the lie, though? Where is the lie? Oh, George Takei steps in, that disgusting, utterly disgusting man. But let's talk about Oreos. Oreo took a stand following QAnon-loving Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Senator Rand Paul's anti-trans statements. Again, from Up Rocks. Green's perspective is that the Equality Act will destroy women's rights and religious freedoms, and people were disgusted by such behavior by an elected official. These are the same people who are not disgusted by, but instead delight, revel in the sexual mutilation of children. And Rand Paul, using the term genital mutilation, was a genius political stroke. So Oreo Cookie tweeted, "Trans people exist." They seem to be going for the alphabet people market. Is that a large part of the soy-based foods market? I suppose it is. Uprock's comments, simple, period, effective, period, truth. You know, this is the Iranian solution to homosexuality. Iran takes the view that, and this is supported by the mullahs, that homosexuality doesn't really exist. And thus, they should get sex changes. Women should become men and vice versa. And then there won't be a problem, except that the majority of male to female transsexuals and vice versa are now, they want to have sex with the same sex. Male to female transsexuals identify, most of them, as lesbians now. So I think that Iran might have got the wrong end of the stick. Gallup poll, Americans' self-identified sexual orientation by generation, category bisexual. Traditionalists born before 1946, 0.3%. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, 0.3%. Generation X, born 1965 to 1980, 1.8%. Millennials, born 1981 to 1996, 5.1%. And a Generation Z, born 1997 to 2002, 11.5%. Matt Walsh comments, the number of kids who identify as alphabet people, especially trans and bisexual, has absolutely skyrocketed. If you think this is natural or organic development, you're deluded. The media, Hollywood, and the school system actively recruit children into the alphabet people ranks. Oh yes, gay straight alliances, or as I prefer to call them, school approved and hosted grooming dens. Walsh continues, the number of supposedly trans children and young adults is 10 times higher than the number among older generations. Do you think that's because a lot more people are born in the wrong body these days? Whatever the hell that even means. No, this is social engineering. In our culture, the LGBT lobby poses the greatest threat to our children, especially the T part. Abigail Schreier reports in her book, did extensive interviews with young women, transitioning women, and their parents, that lesbianism is over, according to these Gen Z children. Lesbianism is a porn category. It's a very sad story because, yes, all this talk about prejudice against women, there's no glass ceiling for college-educated or college-graduating women. I believe they earn more than men in the United States now. But no, women, you're just going to be discriminated against, and it will never end. So how about that they become men instead? How about that? Jim Bancroft, 6%, or J. Edward 02, said, Coke gave me a reason to quit soda. Oreo just gave me a reason to stop eating cookies. Cadbury gave me a reason to quit chocolate. You know, I'm going to be eating healthy from now on. Yes, Coca-Cola announced, last week, that their new slogan and what they were forcing on their employees was going to be less white. I guess I love Coca-Cola. I love Coca-Cola, and now I'm struggling with this. Should I drastically reduce my consumption, which would probably be better for me health-wise, or just abandon it all together? We see Americans' self-identified sexual orientation by generation. Gallup poll, lesbian, traditionalists 0.2%, and then baby boomers 0.4%, Generation X 0.7%, millennials 0.8%, Generation Z 1.4%. This is not the stupendous rise that we have seen in bisexual. And Liz Lemon on 30 Rock said there's no such thing as bisexual. That's just something invented in the 90s so they could sell more hair products. Glenn Greenwald, who is a homosexual, tweets some really fascinating findings in the big new Gallup survey on Americans identifying as alphabet people. It should lead to lots of deeper investigation to understand what explains some of these astronomical changes. But for now, a few points to note. There's been a huge explosion in the number of Americans identifying as LGBT. Close to 1 out of 5 Gen Z so identifies. That's more than a 4-fold increase from Gen X. But almost all of the increase comes from those identifying as bi or trans, not gay or lesbian. As Americans now claiming the bi identity, the vast majority of them in long-term relationships are in opposite sex relationships, 33%, rather than same-sex ones. So 10 times more people who identify as bi live in hetero-appearing relationships than gay lesbian ones. Perhaps Liz Lemon was right. Finally, as famed lesbian Kitty Herzog notes, there are now among millennials and Generation Z more people identifying as trans than lesbian. She has previously argued that masculine girls are now encouraged to identify as trans, causing a decrease in the lesbian population. Here, Katie's article exploring whether the disappearance of lesbian culture is due to the encouragement which masculine girls receive from the society, therapists, healthcare workers, etc., to identify as trans, not as lesbian women. Clearly, the massive increase in Americans self-identifying as alphabet people, an increase due overwhelmingly to more bi and trans self-identifiers, is partially a function of increased societal acceptance. But that's clearly not the only factor, and I doubt it's the primary one. It doesn't. What does it mean, actually, when a person says that, especially a woman says bisexual? You will have noticed, and I'm sure that young women have noticed this, that practically every prominent singer and actress, younger ones, over the last decade have said, oh no, I love the person. It has nothing to do with gender. They all say this. It is pretty much de rigueur, obligatory now. And young girls are very keen. They very easily pick up this kind of social marker that it is now, as I say, de rigueur. Oh no, I wouldn't just sleep with anyone's sex because that would be exclusionary somehow. Abigail Schreier writes in the Federalist on February the 11th, a month ago, I was sent a tweet storm written by a woman who had worked as a reproductive health assistant at Planned Parenthood for about 18 months prior to March 2020. If you assume that the employee had abortion on her mind, then your knowledge of Planned Parenthood is outdated. Well, Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of, as they say, of abortion services in the United States of America, but is now one of the largest providers in the United States of cross-sex hormones, like testosterone, to females seeking medical gender transition. The employees' responsibilities included screening patients, taking down their lists of medications and medical histories before the nurse arrived to treat. Later, I was able to interview her and verify her employment from an old pay stub. The employee insisted, both on Twitter and during our interview, that she was reluctant to say anything critical of Planned Parenthood because she believes in its core mission. Having said that, their recent roles in trans activism are abhorrent, the woman said, and they're digging their own grave. The Planned Parenthood clinic where she worked was located in a small town of roughly 30,000. Abortions were the clinic's bread and butter. Ugh, that's an unfortunate phrase, something this employee fully supports. But she noted, quote, trans-identifying kids are cash cows and they are kept on the hook for the foreseeable future in terms of follow-up appointments, blood work, meetings, etc., where abortions are hopefully a one-and-done situation, unquote. How significant is this revenue stream? I've never been able to obtain numbers on that, although the Planned Parenthood website for Central and Western New York states that, quote, nationally, Planned Parenthood is the second largest provider of gender-affirming, there's that phrase again, hormone care, unquote. It seems reasonable to conclude that hormone treatments, pricey as they are, now contribute materially to Planned Parenthood's bottom line. According to the employee, based on a recollection, 1 to 2 new biologically female teen patients seeking testosterone would arrive per day. A few reasonable assumptions and some arithmetic reveal that a shocking percentage of the town's teen girls came through the clinic over just a few years. There were no doctors at the clinic where she worked. Nurse practitioners were the professionals with the highest medical training, and the clinic employed a gender counselor who had no actual professional credentials or formal training other than being a male to female transgender person. Whether patients received specific treatments, a course of testosterone, say, was decided by the clinic manager, a person with no prior medical experience, whose previous job was managing a Wendy's, the employee wrote. Each day, new teen girls would present at the clinic, sometimes with mom. Yes, moms seem to bear a great deal of responsibility for this. They often arrived in groups of girlfriends, all claiming childhood histories of gender dysphoria and asking to be put on testosterone. Did she believe their testimonies? I think they were telling what they perceived to be their authentic history to them at the time, like, I was a 13-year-old girl, you know. Everything is very dire. Everything needs to be remedied immediately, she said. In any case, the script Planned Parenthood instructed her to read from didn't grant much room for evaluation of patient histories. The questions that we asked were like very closed-ended. It would be like, you know, at what age did this start? Boom, that is it. What kinds of dysphoria do you feel? Boom, that's it. You know, what do you want out of your transition? Do you want top surgery? That is having your breasts removed. Do you want bottom surgery? I don't want to go into that because it is too disgusting and almost unbelievable. This treatment, Abigail Schreier writes, testosterone carries serious risks for adolescent girls, particularly at the doses at which it is administered 10 to 40 times what their bodies would normally handle. Risks include a deepened voice, enlarged clitoris, increase in red blood cell count, and greater risk of heart attack, infertility, vaginal and uterine atrophy, endometrial cancer, as well as all the unknown risks that come from any major and novel intervention. She would present the girls with pages that listed a series of medical risks and obtain signatures indicating their informed consent. Did any of the girls ever seem troubled by these risks? I can say anecdotally that I never saw anybody read it, she said. Most interesting to me was the fact that, according to the employee, the girls would often arrive at the clinic with a group of friends. For what other medical treatments do girls arrive with peer group in tow? It smacked more of the gleeful trips teen girls once took to the mall for ear piercings than the sober medical treatment of a genuine mental health disorder. Okay, well, we've seen this before. These girls will say, oh, ever since I can remember, or even before they can remember, I've always felt that I was more a boy than a girl. They're making it up because we've seen the same thing with these homosexual confessions. Oh, ever since I can remember, these unfortunate people would say they always thought that I was different, etc., etc. I always knew. Oh, you knew when you were 5 years old, did you? No, you couldn't possibly know because you had no idea what the subject was about. But we decided we were going to believe these ridiculous stories because then we don't have to get into the business of, how exactly were you initiated into gay sex? No. Nobody wants to talk about that because it's pretty shocking and also, in a great many cases, criminal. But no, comforting lies are what we want. Okay, let's look at the chat. Chogokin666 says Levine also took her elderly parents out of care prior to quarantine with foreknowledge. And yes, it was a similar situation in Pennsylvania as in the state of New York. Palpicasso88 says, I wonder if G.I. Joe is gender liquid. Well, G.I. Joe is an awesome fighter, right? So why not? Facile Goose says, weird ontological flex. Metal Mike says, because that's what the public wants. Oh, is that what the public wants? I read a story today that said apparently 2/3 of the Canadian public are in favor of this monstrous extension to physician-assisted murder. They may have told the pollsters that, but these are the sort of results that you get when no one is arguing for the other side. How about the Conservative Party, say? How about for them to make the bold stand of, no, we do not believe that people who are depressed should be able to have doctors murder them? How about that, huh? How about we don't believe that the disabled, however you want to define them, should be culled? No, but they're not going to do that because that would be socially conservative and backward thinking. Roulette Crack says, I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. How can a kid make life-changing decisions? No, they can't. Adam says, never attribute to evil that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Can the mutilation of children be adequately explained by mere stupidity? No, it cannot. Palcasso88 says, George Takei, a hack actor who won the lottery by being on Star Trek. What career has this fellow had after being on Star Trek? I know he's been a professional gay for the last quarter century or so, but that doesn't pay any money. Does it? Anarin says, even evil doesn't seem strong enough. This tea stuff is satanic. Roulette Crack says, Christians stopped recruiting and the devil loves a vacuum. Dan says, Baphomet is often depicted as both male and female. Oh, yes. Conformed consent. I don't know. Isn't it true that in school that children can get hardly any medical treatment without the consent of their parents in order to avoid lawsuits? I learned from Abigail Schreier's book that it is now routine in public schools and in expensive private schools for these unfortunate girls to tell everyone and to tell their teachers that they are men or boys, and so they have chosen a boy's name, usually not a traditional boy's name, and then they all go along with it. The whole school goes along with it, and the word is put out that the parents are not to be told of this. Calix Rose says, we just bombed Syria. Okay. I don't know. Drudge doesn't update anymore. Let's try CNN. Okay. Ex-USA gymnastics coach John Geddert found dead after being charged with human trafficking and sex crimes. Perhaps gymnastics in the United States should just be shut down. Okay, let's try another way of finding this out about Syria. Okay, I think Biden just launched them into, Columbia Bugle's making a joke. Any updates on those immediate $2,000 checks? Asks Susan Sarandon. And Columbia Bugle says, I think Biden just launched them into Syria. This is from disclose.tv. Just in, U.S. has carried out airstrikes against Iran-backed militia in Syria in an operation approved by Joe Biden. Fox News is reporting that U.S. launches airstrikes against Iranian-backed forces in Syria. Multiple facilities were struck in the air raid, which was sanctioned by Biden. The senior official said the strike was a defensive strategy intended to halt and deter future rocket attacks by the militia group that recently hit Baghdad and Erbil. Iraq is American territory now. Is it? Okay, let's go back to the chat. Stimulus bill still not passed, but Syria tax, says Chocokin 666. Okay. Yeah, Star Trek actors make bank during conventions. Star Trek went off the air, in 1969, which was 62 years ago. So how many generations, how old are these people who go to the Star Trek conventions? Because I remember these Trekkies being mocked on Saturday Night Live, back in the 1970s? And we have several generations past that. Well, okay. There is no accounting for taste, as they say. So, oh yes, let's talk about Washington's state of siege. This is from the New York Times and by Luke Broadwater today. The acting chief of the Capitol Police warned lawmakers Thursday that extremist groups that carried out the January 6th riot, it's a riot again? I thought it was a coup, want to blow up the Capitol and kill lawmakers around President Biden's first formal address to Congress. And kill lawmakers around President Biden's first formal address to Congress? Do they have any editors still working at the Times? Calling for security measures deployed after the deadly attack to remain for several more weeks. How exactly was it a deadly attack? Okay, they're not going to get in specifics. They don't want to bring up that business of the fire extinguisher again. And the acting chief of the Capitol Police is called Yogananda Pittman. And she said, "We have no intention of keeping the National Guard soldiers or that fencing any longer than what is actually needed. We know that members of the militia groups that were present on January 6th have stated their desires that they want to blow up the Capitol and kill as many members as possible with a direct nexus to the State of the Union." Why didn't they do that on January the 6th then? I keep hearing about an insurrection or an attempt to seize the Capitol. They entered, strangely, because the doors were open and milled around, most of them between the ropes. Some glass was broken, some offices were entered, a couple of laptops were stolen, some furniture was tossed around. That does not sound like a insurrection to me, or certainly not a coup. It's a riot. There was no attempt to secure the building and to hold it, let alone was there any attempt at widespread damage, let alone destruction. But everyone is determined to lie about this now. Extremist groups and militia members, the New York Times reports, were among the hundreds of pro-Trump rioters who attacked the Capitol last month in an attempt to stop the certification of Joe Biden's victory and keep President Donald J. Trump in power. The violent rampage caused injuries to nearly 140 police officers. What? Afterward, tens of thousands of National Guard troops were sent to the Capitol, which is now fortified on all sides with tall fences topped with razor wire. Chief Pittman said the extremist groups still want to send a symbolic message to the nation. She added that the crowd of Trump supporters grew to more than 10,000 that day, and about 800 entered the Capitol building. Congressional leaders have yet to set a date for Biden's speech to a joint session of the House and the Senate, that traditionally called the State of the Union address. We think it's prudent Capitol Police maintain its robust security posture, Chief Pittman said. Yes, so if the Capitol appears to be under siege, then I suppose it must be under siege. And how long are they going to keep this up? Probably until the 2022 midterms. Probably that far, because these militia people, they're everywhere, and apparently there's been chat. Chat has been monitored. Well, if you want to monitor violent chat, there's no end of it, you know. These people are big talkers. Here's a fascinating insight. Thread on the new Echelon Insights polling about voter priorities and what Republicans in particular are looking for. Unlike traditional top issue questions, we have asked people to rate each issue on how much it concerns them. We tested these issues with everyone. This is from Kristen Soltis Anderson. And the Dems are very much concerned about Trump supporters. Very much concerned. Here's what they're most concerned about. Donald Trump supporters. How concerned are you, if at all, that the following are a problem for the country? Donald Trump supporters. 82% of Democrats said they were concerned, and 57% said extremely concerned. White nationalism, whatever that might mean. 79% of Democrats said that they were concerned. 54% said extremely concerned. Systemic racism, whatever that might mean. 77% said they were extremely or very concerned. 14% said somewhat concerned. Actually, this graph is set out in a rather confusing way. It turns out that 92% of Democrats are extremely very concerned or somewhat concerned about Donald Trump's supporters. Because apparently they're all white nationalists, white supremacists, and they're just foaming at the mouth to foment a coup in Washington, D.C. Apparently, they were let into the Capitol building for some strange reason, but they didn't take advantage of that to attempt to seize the building. So President Joe Biden was going to give the State of the Union address in February. Oh, no, he never said that. Yeah, well, the internet never forgets, you know. This is from Kyle Becker at Becker News. President Biden was expected to have given his first State of the Union address by now, although the mainstream press is issuing fact checks. To dispute the claim, Biden was supposed to have had one by February 20th. The Associated Press earlier reported that he was supposed to have had one by Check's calendar yesterday. It is indisputable that the president can have the State of the Union address whenever he or she wants, or none at all, like Jimmy Carter chose in 1977, or even submitted in writing, as the same president did in 1981. Good for Jimmy Carter. This is just turned into ridiculous circus. Oh, yes. Ronald Reagan started this deplorable habit. Here are a bunch of people who did heroic things. And I'm going to introduce them and ask them to stand up so that their heroism is somehow transferred to me, who had nothing to do with it. All the presidents do that now. Again, deplorable. Let's see. Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki contradicts Biden's plan to address a joint session of Congress this month. The White House is postponing plans for Biden to address a joint session of Congress to unveil the second phase of a coronavirus recovery plan as it continues to work on a massive relief bill. Well, given that for years now, going back to the Patriot Act or even before, Congress was expected to vote on massive acts that it had no chance to read. No chance to read. You'll find out what's in it after you vote for it, Nancy Pelosi famously said. She actually said that. Last month, Biden said he would appear before Congress. This is again from the Washington Examiner in February to set out his Build Back Better recovery plan. But on Tuesday, when asked about the timing, his press secretary, Jen Psaki, said there had never been a plan for him to address a joint session this month. We don't know where the February 23rd date came from. It's a great mystery, she said. I've not Nancy Drew'd that one out today. Yeah, Nancy Drew'd. Okay, I understand that Nancy Drew has been rebooted. I gather it's going to be a lot grittier and more relevant than it was. Nancy Drew is still white based on the promos that I've seen. Her sexuality was not addressed in the promo. An article from American Greatness. This is by Max Morton. And who is he when he is at home? He is a retired U.S. Marine Corps lieutenant colonel, former CIA paramilitary operations officer, and a veteran of multiple armed conflicts, revolutions, and contingency operations. This is called The Last Stop Before Thermopylae. America's at a crossroads. We're facing the greatest threat to liberty the Republic has yet encountered. A ruling elite backed by the primary institutions of power in America, the media, academia, the permanent bureaucracy, and the defense intelligence complex. These institutions are fully committed to a top-down rebellion of the elites, determined to protect the wealth and power of the establishment. No enemy is as dangerous as the enemy within, and this enemy now controls the reins of national power in America. We have a choice: submit or fight. At this point, it's unproductive to rehash the litany of self-sabotage inflicted upon America over the past 4 years. And equally unproductive is casting the new regime and its nomenclatura as some sort of golem that distracts us from what we need to do to survive. For traditional Americans inundated with a continuous stream of who did what to whom, outrage and hypocrisy now fall on deaf ears. The time to cry about the past is over. The solution to our predicament lies in what we do from here forward. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu wrote, "If you know yourself and you know the enemy, you need not fear 1,000 battles." Let's take an honest look at who we are and the threat we face. American society is now cleaved into two factions that are intrinsically at odds with one another. On one hand, you have traditional Americans. They come in every race, creed, and religion. They believe in law and order, expect everyone to follow the rules, and mostly just want to be left alone. Family-orientated, self-reliant, and armed, traditional Americans populate the working class ranks of the military, law enforcement, and industry. Sadly, most are technically illiterate. They underestimate the threat from the surveillance state and Securitate. Many still believe the FBI only goes after bad guys, and they cannot grasp that the national security apparatus now views them as the enemy. They rightly bristle when slandered with white supremacist or terrorist labels. A habituated trust in authority makes them vulnerable to snitching on others and collaborating with those they shouldn't. Many are infected with white knight conspiracy theories that counsel remaining submissive. In general, they have nearly zero control over the nation's money, media, government, academia, legal system, and surveillance state. On the other hand is the ruling elite. They advocate a multi-tiered justice system and expect others to follow their rules, beliefs, and norms. They are politically savvy and disciplined. They view traditional Americans and their beliefs as an impediment to their wealth and utopian dreams, going so far as routinely to advocate extreme actions such as genocide, re-education, and the removal of the children of their political opposition. They employ proxy forces such as Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and journalists to bully ordinary Americans and weak-willed corporations. In order to intimidate and discredit their political opposition, they've weaponized the use of labels such as white supremacist and terrorist on their enemies. They are generally opposed to religion and personal firearm ownership, and they cannot allow you to be left alone. They will attempt to nudge wrong thinkers into accepting the ruling elite's ideology. If that doesn't work, they'll force compliance via law enforcement, military, and intelligence agencies they now command. They control most of the national wealth and all of the media, government, academia, legal authorities, and surveillance state. Well, yeah. The right to be left alone, that vanished with Ruby Ridge. And wasn't that at the beginning of Bill Clinton's first term? It became obvious with Ruby Ridge that there was nowhere left to hide. If you have certain opinions, no matter how harmless you are, and no matter the fact you're living in a wilderness, you will be hunted down by the state. And then the state will engage in a cover-up to absolve those guilty of, murder. Yeah. So this isn't new. It's not new. This is quite a long essay. But Morton concludes, one cannot get small enough or anonymous enough to avoid the tyranny and oppression associated with authoritarian regimes. Do not delay. Always keep in mind the adage that no one is coming to save you. Remember, you have the power and now responsible for your own liberty. If you get to the Thermopylae, you've gone too far. And his essay, which again is an American Greatness or amgreatness.com, goes into how one can protect oneself. Yes, come with me if you want to live is one of the headings. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to call it the 2020 pandemic. Again, I have to be exceedingly careful on this subject, lest I be given a second warning by my host, which would take me off for a week. But the Queen, that is to say, the Queen of England has intervened regarding, let's call them prophylactics to this pandemic. The Queen has made a historic intervention in the coronavirus vaccination drive, suggesting it's selfish not to have the jab. In a video call with National Health Service officials in charge of the rollout, she encouraged those with doubts to think about other people rather than themselves. The 94-year-old monarch said her jab last month didn't hurt at all and made her feel protected, likening COVID to a plague. She said it was remarkable how quickly the inoculation program had been put into action, helping so many people. The Daily Mail says it is highly unusual for the sovereign to take such a firm public stand on contentious issues, and her remarks will be seen as a victory for efforts to increase take-up. An NHS vaccine chief said it was an incredibly important vote of confidence in the program. Yes. So with highlights here. Think about other people. Once you've had the vaccine, you have a feeling you're protected, which I think is very important. It's obviously difficult for people if they've never had a vaccine. Where are the people out there who have never had a vaccine? But they ought to think about other people rather than themselves. Yeah, okay. You have a feeling that you're protected when you have the vaccine, but on the other hand, you ought to think about other people rather than yourself. It's a bit like the plague, isn't it, she says. No, it's not at all like the plague, which killed 1/3 of the population of Europe during the Middle Ages. Yes. The Queen continued, because it's not only here that we've got the virus, but it's everywhere. So it's a strange battle that everybody's actually fighting. Having lived in the war, it's very much like that when everybody had the same idea. Actually, that's not true about Britain in the Second World War. There were a lot of people who did not all have the same idea, particularly communists, radical leftists, many in the trade union movement. But let's just keep up this myth of the spirit of the Blitz. As far as I can make out, the Queen says, it was quite harmless, the jab. It was very quick, and I've had lots of letters from people who've been surprised by how easy it was to get the vaccine. It didn't hurt at all. So here is a vote of confidence from Queen Elizabeth II, who I must point out has presided over, and sometimes it seems gleefully, over the most profound decline in England's history. And given her bungled handling of the Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz debacle, she might be the last monarch of Great Britain. Oh, so it's QE2C, Angela Merkel, no. Again, from the Daily Mail, Tim Stickings, Angela Merkel has said she will not take the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine because she is too old, despite Europe begging its citizens to take the shot to speed up its floundering jab rollout as regulators continue to limit access for over 65s in spite of real-world proof that it works. The German Chancellor, 66, was asked if she would take the jab to set an example to a country where many are refusing to take the Oxford jab, and 1.2 million of the shots are lying unused in storage. It comes after a host of EU figures, including Emmanuel Macron, questioned the jab's effectiveness and lashed out at AstraZeneca to save face in a row over procurement last month. But Merkel told the FAZ, what is that, the Frankfurter Allgemeine, what did she tell them? She said that she was not eligible because German regulators have restricted the jab to under 65s, a move which is yet to be reversed, even after data from Scotland showed it is highly effective in the elderly. I'm 66 years old and do not belong to the recommended group for AstraZeneca, Merkel said, after describing the vaccine as reliable, effective, and safe for others to take. This might have something to do with the lack of testing. Lack of testing of people over 80, but 66, it's a long way from 80, actually. It's a very curious statement from the perpetual chancellor of Germany. One doesn't know whether to laugh or cry at this next story from the New York Post from Yaron Steinbuch. The Chinese government has used anal swabs to test U.S. diplomats for COVID-19, but Beijing insisted to Washington that the butt checks were made in error. The State Department never agreed to this kind of testing and protested directly to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when we learned that some staff were subject to it. A State Department rep told Vice World News on Wednesday. Washington complained that the rather invasive procedure was undignified, according to the report. The state spokesperson said Beijing had assured Washington the tests were given in error and the diplomats were exempt from the test, which was required for incoming travelers in some parts of China. China to U.S. assume the position. U.S. response, okay. None of these people decided to scream bloody murder to their superiors. They just took it. We see who has the power. I guess that's how you can define who has the power today, is who can force whom to be anally swabbed. And when I first heard about these anal swabs, I thought, yes, more of this irresponsible right-wing trolling, but it's true. Of course it was true. Of course. Mark Changizi writes, coronavirus lockdown lunacy is frying our minds. More and more recognition that we're in a mass hysteria. This one, a new paper on the topic by Adam Creighton. If you thought Perth's bizarre 5-day lockdown over a single person who wasn't sick and infected no one else was strange, then Victoria's statewide third lockdown of 6.6 million people is so freakish it raises a worrying possibility. For 3 German and Spanish economists, it's time to ask this question: have we forgotten the rationality that's meant to define policymaking in advanced liberal democracies? They have governments have instilled fear in the general public to achieve political goals, exploiting the negativity bias of the human brain, according to one of the authors of the study, Philip Baggis, to The Australian, revealing how a leaked German government paper last year recommended scaring people to ensure compliance with health advice. Australia and New Zealand have incurred costs equivalent to a world war, and more than any other nation has, fighting a pandemic that has killed not even 1,000 people, with a median age in the mid-80s between them. And this is widely seen as brilliant. Across the Tasman, Auckland entered its own 3-day lockdown. The science is a little different there. On Sunday, Valentine's Day diners fled restaurants mid-meal. At 8:30 p.m., the media reported, as patrons' mobile phones lit up with the announcement of the city's third lockdown. The venerable Economist magazine even wrote last week that 150 million people would die, 3 times the number killed by the Spanish flu from COVID-19, without strong government action, a claim breathtaking in its absurdity. Well, I don't know. Is it still absurd when all the best and the brightest believe it, or at least say it, or insist upon it? You know, one could talk about other similar absurdities in human history, but when one is being compelled to pretty much abandon everything that we knew about life, it seems to go a little beyond absurdity. Oh, yeah. Australia. Sorry, New Zealand. New Zealand does not have very many people in it. Not very many people at all. 5.1 million people total. New Zealand are two islands, pretty much at the end of the world. So obviously New Zealand would have certain advantages in the same way that I live in an island. And because of isolation, obviously the people who live on my island, Vancouver Island, are given, a certain amount of immunity from any pandemic, as we have seen. Despite many lockdowns, some almost total in nature, and lifting the lockdowns, going back to lockdowns, permanent mask mandate since August. Well, last time I checked, the number of people that had died of COVID-19 since the beginning was 11. So New Zealand has a population of 5.1 million people. It has had 2,368 COVID-19 cases and 26 deaths. For this, it has destroyed its society and set its economy on fire. Yes, and apparently this is genius public policy. Some New Zealander was very upset at me tweeting this out. Well, where's the evidence? Well, I went looking for it. I found a story from BBC from September 17th. COVID pushes New Zealand into worst recession in years. The country's GDP shrank between 12.2% between April and June as the lockdown and border closures hit. It is New Zealand's first recession since the global financial crisis, and its worst since 1987, when the current system of measurement began. But the government hopes its pandemic response will lead to a quick recovery. And of course, it's the sad Muslim lady who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, was re-elected. Finance Minister Grant Robertson said GDP numbers were better than expected and suggested a strong recovery ahead. There's a bait and switch here. People, to this day, if you ask people what they thought that the GDP meant, they would speak of it in terms of, wealth creation. Government outputs are part of GDP. So if New Zealand decides to destroy its economy and then borrows billions of dollars to give to people who have lost their jobs, then you can make the GDP increase. After Alberta's economy was destroyed by the collapse in the price of oil a few years ago, such was the NDP government's borrowing that Alberta had at one point the fastest growing GDP in Canada. GDP has actually little to do with wealth, particularly the wealth of, shall we say, ordinary people. So, which Canadian province is the Florida of Canada? Despite the fact that Florida has done much, much, much better than New York State, where Governor Death presides, and New Jersey and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Alabama and all lockdown states. Oh, no. No, Florida is bad. So a bunch of bullies on Twitter were pushing for mandatory universal masking for kids in elementary schools in Canada. Someone called Dr. Lisa Yatatoni, assistant professor of dermatology at the University of Montreal, says, wow, 18 hours later, Quebec announces universal masking for kids in elementary schools. This is really great news. Universal masking indoors is low-hanging fruit that makes us all safer. Now, please remove the 2-meter rule from the guidelines for masking in workplaces. Yes. And someone called Eric Feigl-Ding, epidemiologist, health economist, formerly 16 years at Harvard, was the chief bully here. He had tweeted February 23rd, active COVID-19 cases surged faster in teachers and students than Quebec public Pre-holiday school cases surge faster than general population. Schools closed for holidays, cases plummet. Winter break over, schools cases rose again. Yes, and how many of these children got sick? And Dr. Lisa responded, thanks for amplifying. Advocacy is so important. Hopefully, if everyone makes enough noise, we can get mask mandates at BC schools as well. Jessica Mead Ramey, oh, question authority, she says. Ha, 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 ha. Doc Lisa, you are forced to be reckoned with in the fight against SARS-CoV-2 spread. Keep on keeping on, and never let the light of truth and fact in science waver and go out. Mirasit Lover had said, you're telling me there are no mask mandates for any ages in BC schools? Dr. Lisa said, wild, right? They finally got a mask mandate in high schools 3 weeks ago, but it doesn't apply when they're sitting at their desk in class. I have to ask myself, does this go far enough? Because apparently we have a serious problem with unregulated breathing, which may well be the gravest challenge that humanity has ever faced. So perhaps we should sew together the lips of children and adults so that they can breathe only through their noses. This would reduce the chances of both inhaling and exhaling COVID-19 and make it impossible for anyone to ever again speak out against the sanitary dictatorship madness. My own little modest proposal. So, curious thing about New Zealand, it is one of the most irreligious countries on earth. According to 2018 data, only 37% of New Zealanders are identified as Christian, with 48.5% at no religion, and the next highest category, 6.6% no answer. I think this is there's a direct correlation here. If you do not believe in God, if you do not believe in final judgment, if you do not believe in heaven and hell, then clearly the end of the earthly life is the end, full stop. And so everything must be done to prevent it for all people, even if there are, how would I say, unanticipated consequences, such as the decision that, COVID-19 is the only real disease and everything else like cancer and heart disease and the like. It's just those people can wait and wait and wait. So, okay. Oh, let's see. From USA Today, really remarkable piece that appeared 2 days ago by Jason Sattler, opinion columnist. A just moment to the Trump presidency, bury the 500,000 COVID dead at Mar-a-Lago. Well, I believe more than 100,000 of those have come since Joe Biden became president. How can we honor the more than 500,000 Americans who lost their lives to COVID-19 while marking former President Donald Trump's shameless failure to preserve, protect, and defend this country and the Constitution? Easy, let's bury the dead at Mar-a-Lago. Okay. About 3 million Americans die each and every year. So 500,000 Americans dead. And this is over the more than one calendar year. Why are they more special than anyone else has died? Why? How are they heroes? Simply dying doesn't make anyone a hero because everyone dies eventually. Sattler continues, this small measure of justice would have an obvious historical precedent. Arlington, the former home of Robert E. Lee, that is now Arlington National Cemetery, became a final resting place for Union soldiers in the spring 1864 after 82,000 soldiers died in 1 month of fighting. Who couldn't argue this wasn't a just punishment? Lee had abandoned his post in the U.S. Army to lead the army of what Frederick Douglass called the Slaveholders' Rebellion. Lee's treachery was obvious. Trump's crimes against his country, however, far more devious, and continue as he remains dedicated to undermining our democracy. So Robert E. Lee was a traitor. Was George Washington a traitor? Yes, by any reasonable definition, he was. So was Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and Patrick Henry, and James Madison. So Why are they still honored? Because they were traitors. Well, so I know the old adage, if a treason doth prosper, none dare call it treason. Oh, yes, Trump did this and that. Oh, he's accused of sucking up to China, but then being xenophobic. Oh, and helping fuel an outbreak of hate crimes against Asian Americans. Oh, okay. A bunch of Asian Americans were attacked by black people in the United States. This was first blamed on white supremacy. Now it's blamed on Donald Trump's treatment of COVID-19. Okay. What do we know about this fellow? Well, if I were him, I would have taken this down. He has a blog called Human Parts. And he describes himself as a writer of asexual erotica. This is just too good to be true. This is too good to be true. Let's see. He seems to write a lot about high school. One of his pieces is called Perpetual Adolescence. When Ava Shapiro limped back into AP European history the day before prom, she'd been gone for almost 2 months, or 34.333 school days. In that lifetime of spring, everything went wrong. Cliques tightened, mutated, and dissolved. Mismatched couples flirted, exchanged bodily fluids, and parted. Even lunch sucked. Worst of all, my little brother sank into the dankest depths of puberty, and no one noticed until he interrupted my birthday dinner at the fanciest seafood place on Parthenia Street, the one near Skateland that always reeked of kelp and crotch, to insist we call him Chadwick, though his birth certificate read Chad, and he hadn't grown even one visible arm hair. This is just absolutely dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. Yes, the pain of high school. Okay. It's a funny thing about high school, which is that if you don't like it very much, there comes a point where you stop going to it. And you were 17 or 18 years old when high school, at the oldest, when high school is over for you. Some people don't like to get over it, though. Some people like to wallow in it for the rest of their lives. And some of these people are recruited to write opinion pieces for USA Today. A photographer called Laura Dodsworth has a piece in thecritic.co.uk. She collaborated with seamstress Nina Murden on a project to convey the ideological significance of face masks, the new vestiture of the faithful. Dodsworth writes, do masks provide confidence, or do they keep fear in your face? Are they scientifically proven barriers to transmission, or hopeful talismans? Do they express communitarianism or abnegation of the self? Curiously, I am more nervous about unveiling a photography series depicting the quasi-religious values masks represent than I was about my series on penises and vulvas. Will mouths covered by stitch words be more provocative than bare bodies? The past year have been told that wearing a mask was an act of solidarity. It showed you care. I even remember an article saying that wearing a mask was an act of love. Social media has rung with wear a goddamn mask. Masks have become totemic in the latest culture war, putting the issue of conformism or rebellion right in her face. Well, kudos to Laura Dodsworth for using the word vulva instead of vagina. Almost no one does this correctly anymore. I'm looking at a bunch of pictures here. One has a mask that says obedience. One says piety. One says solidarity. One says new normal. One says conformity. And one says compliance. It's been stormy in Victoria over the last 2 days, with gusts of winds up to 40, 50 miles an hour. This happens quite a lot because Victoria is at the tip of a peninsula. And I kept seeing all these people out on the streets being buffeted, having, to plant their feet wide apart to avoid being knocked over, and they're wearing masks. Yes, indeed. Okay, let's go to James Burnham here. And we're talking about Robert Michels and leadership. And today, the autocracy of leadership. I should explain that Michels became an expert in how trade unions work. At the time that James Burnham wrote his book, The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom, trade unions were exceedingly powerful in the United States of America and elsewhere in the Western world. They are no longer powerful, except for, I suppose, perhaps public sector unions, and that has to do with a phenomenon called neoliberalism. But let's get to it here. Cultural and psychological causes combine with the technical conditions of organization to bring about a division between the leaders on the one hand and the mass of the organization's membership on the other. The leadership is consolidated as a group relatively independent of the mass. The leaders are indispensable to the organization's life and activities. In practice, in spite of the forms and doctrines of democracy, the leaders are in a position to control and dominate the mass. Let us study further how the autocracy of the leadership expresses and maintains itself. The leaders, mere representatives, according to democratic theory, have effective control of the organization's finances. The funds are, for the most part, supplied by the mass. In theory, and to some extent, in fact, the mass can impose certain restrictions on what is done with the funds. But in practice, the use and distribution of funds is under the direct control of the leaders. This control is often very crudely expressed by the tendency of leaders to assign relatively large amounts of money to themselves, a tendency of particular interest as it operates in labor organizations. In the early days of trade unions or labor political parties, the leaders were usually non-professional, or serving perhaps part-time with little or no pay. The indispensable need for full-time and professional leaders is soon apparent. There is usually a stage where the conception arises that a leader should be paid at a rate that would be received from an ordinary employer by a worker member of the organization. This stage soon passes. As the organization grows and becomes established and powerful, the pay which the leaders receive from the organization goes rapidly up until it is far beyond the income level of the ordinary members. A trade union official in this country at the present time, this is the early 1940s, frequently gets as much as a $40,000 salary, plus that or more in expenses, as well as the use of union property such as houses, cars, and even airplanes. This financial privilege marks the dominance of the leaders over the organization, and at the same time, through the greater resources, cultural as well as material, which the high income places at the leaders' disposal, reinforces their dominance. In the beginning, at conventions and meetings, the members protest this development, which they rightly regard as autocratic and directed against themselves, but not successfully or for long. The leaders are beyond their control, and the delegates, some of them grumbling, vote the increases. A personal note. As mentioned previously, I was once a trade union executive. This would have been in the late 1970s, starting in about 1976 at the University of British Columbia. We had an organization called AUP, the Association of University and Professional Employees. We were local number 2. And we had organized all of the clerical workers at UBC. There had been 2 strikes, a fairly long one, well, a couple of weeks, and then a short one. But wages were quadrupled, something like that. So I was a shop steward, and I was the chairman of the grievance committee, and I was a member of the local executive and ex officio of the provincial executive. And it was decided that this union was not going to be a professional union. Now, when representing members in disputes that a shop steward would be necessary for, I would get time off work. When representing members in grievance arbitrations, I would get time off work. All of the rest of the work that was put in, the meetings, the writing letters, the doing of research, all the rest that was done on our own time. And we received no pay for this. And I suppose we patted ourselves on the back about this. But it became obvious over time, well, after I had stopped becoming involved in union affairs, that this led to a burnout of the people involved, because they were expected to have one full-time job and a second job, which was not quite a full-time job, but was very time-consuming and also taxing. So a few years after I stopped being involved in union affairs, AUPE, sorry, it was swallowed by the Canadian Union of Public Employees, one of Canada's largest unions, and then it became a union just like every other union. But back to Burnham. The process, as well as several other tendencies discussed in the last section, were particularly well illustrated in the proceedings of the 1942 Convention of the United Automobile Workers. This great union was then young and showed organizational tendencies in their growth, not as hidden and crystallized in established groups. In its first years before leadership stabilized, indeed it had not yet fully stabilized in 1942, the UAW went through a period of rapid administrative flux. It prided itself publicly on the fact that its officials sought no personal privilege from their work and were paid at the rate of skilled auto workers. I quote now from the New York Times report of the session of the 1942 convention devoted to the salary question. Quote, the salary row started when the Constitution Committee moved that the salary of the international president be advanced to $10,000 a year, that of the Secretary Treasurer be increased from $5,000 to $9,500, and that of executive board members from $3,500 to $6,000, and that the pay of the new vice presidents be set at $8,000. Modest enough sums as union salaries go, but the power of a ruling class is not built in a day. The UAW administration knew that more conventions would come tomorrow. Mingled applause and boos drowned out the chairman's appeal for order as speakers on both sides of the question went into action. James Lindow, chairman of the Constitution Committee, stated that the UAW had more than 600,000 members, that presidents of many local unions made almost as much as President Thomas, revealing argument, and that an organization such as the UAW, which boasted of being the biggest union in the world, could afford to pay its leaders salaries commensurate with those paid other union leaders. The sharpest opposition was expressed by William Mazie, delegate from Hudson Local 154 of Detroit, who was against any increase at all. I feel our officers should be paid the same salary as the rank and file back in the shop, he shouted. Pay them like bosses and they begin to think like bosses. To this, another delegate retorted, we're treating them like the bosses try to treat us when we ask for a raise. President Thomas told the convention that if its delegates desired to do so, the committee could take the amendment back under consideration and cut our salaries. He said the debate was embarrassing to him. And Burnham notes out that this is a mild variant of the resignation device, which we have spoken of earlier, combined with effective democratic piety. Kurt Murdoch, president of Packard Local 190 of Detroit, told the opponents of the measure that they ought to be ashamed of themselves, and that the leaders of industry, to whom the union men would apply for their own raises, would be pleased to hear our arguments against wage increases today. Burnham comments an appeal to the sentiment of gratitude, combined with a veiled threat that the delegates had better knuckle down for their own good. However, this is only one, and on the whole, a minor effect of the power that the leaders wield through their control of the organization's finances. In passing, they may line their own pockets. But it does not really matter if, through conscience or fixed rules or scanty treasury, they do not. If the leaders are not well paid, they are more subject to temptation from without and less likely to be loyal to their own organization. Or, as often in democratic and labor politics, persons with independent means take over the leadership. In any case, the leaders decide the more important questions of the day-by-day use of what funds there are, what and who shall be strengthened, what and who weakened, who put on the payroll and who taken off, who favored and who financially frowned on. In these matters, nations are not different from unions. Shall this local or that get the subsidy from the International? This town or that get the heaviest public works appropriation? Second, collaborating with financial control, the press constitutes a potent instrument for the conquest, the preservation, and the consolidation of power on the part of the leaders. Publicity and propaganda are carried on by all large organizations. Sometimes they are direct and open, where the organization, a political party, for example, publishes in its own name a paper and pamphlet and magazines, runs its own radio programs and speaking campaigns. Sometimes they are more indirect and informal, with advertising and publicity handouts and subsidized journals, writers and speakers who remain nominally independent. Mickels writes, in all cases, the press, as well as publicity and propaganda generally, remains in the hands of the leaders and is never controlled by the rank and file. The press is the most suitable means of diffusing the fame of the individual leaders among the masses for popularizing their names, and at the same time for undermining opponents either by denunciation or by keeping their names out of sight. By the nature of the case, the mass of the membership cannot control or conduct the press and propaganda. And no one, therefore, should be surprised that modern governments employ tens of thousands of publicists and raise the masters of propaganda to their highest posts. Yes, I should notice that in my own country, political opinion in newspapers, and now increasingly television, is dominated by PR spiffs, professional public relations people. Often these people have been long associated with certain political parties, that they are party hacks. Now, these PR spiffs have they have clients. Now, they're not going to go out of their way to alienate their clients. Now, they have former clients who they might want to become clients again, or there are people they would like to sign on as clients. It is outrageous to me that anyone in the PR industry should be allowed to have anything to do with political opinion, because we are not in a position to know what their vested interests are. We don't know this. And yet they're speaking independently to us. Are they? No, they are not. They are in the pockets of other people. And of course, people in the PR business, what is their job? It is to lie for a living. Burnham continues, a third powerful instrument of control possessed by the leaders results from the fact that they administer, in part or altogether, the disciplinary mechanism of the organization. In the state, this is open enough since the leaders give orders to the police, the jailers, and the armed forces. Physical force is not unknown as a disciplinary weapon in organizations other than the state, but other punishments, such as fines and loss of rights or membership, can be equally effective from the point of view of protecting the leadership. In the case of trade unions, the loss of membership can be extremely serious because it often means for the worker the loss of the right to make a living at his trade. Expulsion can obviously get rid of an opposition, though it is an unwelcome device, since it means at least a temporary weakening of the organization as a whole. But the leaders have at their disposal a more subtle disciplinary procedure, namely their effective control over how much of the process of selecting delegates for conventions. The proper handling of this process can be, as all trained leaders know, a most intricate and fascinating talent. More on this tomorrow, but as far as choosing delegates goes, again, we see this in Canada, that the real fight in selecting leaders for political parties or selecting the man who will be prime minister is in the selection of delegates, not persuading people that this or that man or woman should be leader, but no, in determining who will be allowed to be a delegate or a voter and who will be prohibited. Again, more on this tomorrow. I'm going to take a look again at the chat before I move on to Theatre Thursday and Mildred Pierce. Oh, we're talking about various peoples now, are we? And food. Okay. Chad Chadson Hello to our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. We're talking about Turkey here. Happy Iranian New Year. Okay, nobody cares about high school after high school. I suppose there's two categories of people who do care. Those people who were very popular in high school and got a lot of girls and such like, and they find out not so successful in the real world. And those people who were thoroughly miserable in high school and somehow think that letting everyone know about being miserable in high school is some sort of a portal to what? To what exactly? Asexual erotica. Chocokin666 comes up with an example. She entered the room wearing the sheerest of lingerie. She was buxom. I felt nothing. What sort of person identifies himself or herself as asexual, by the way? Obviously, sexual desire exists on a continuum, and it's always been the case that some people are far more interested in it than others, or some people are far more controlled by it than others. But to actually go around saying, where's our flag? The asexuals, when do we get our flag? I think they do have their own flag now, because everyone gets their own flag. But no, what a pitiful thing to boast of. Okay, I am going to be talking about Mildred Pierce now, which is a movie from 1945, and it's directed by Michael Curtiz, and it is based on the 1941 novel by James M. Cain. And just let me bring up a few things here, and I will be ready to go. So, what is this movie about? I suppose you could say that it is a meditation on some lines from King Lear. If she must create her child of spleen, then it may live and be a thwart disnatured torment to her. Let it stamp wrinkles in her brow of youth with cadent tears, fret channels in her cheeks, turn all her mother's pains and benefits to laughter and contempt, that she may feel how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child. This movie is also about ambition and entrepreneurship, and I suppose American versus European modes of thinking. It's also about, well, to put it bluntly, one of the effects of divorce. I believe Christopher Lasch reports that as early as 1920, 1 in 7 American marriages ended in divorce. When you have a divorce, when a woman gets divorced and she has custody of her children, and let's say she had an adolescent female daughter or daughters, then sadly or horrifyingly, as in Mildred Pierce, the daughter will become a sexual competitor to her. Let's talk about Michael Curtiz. He was born in 1886. He died in 1962. He was a Hungarian Jew who came to Hollywood in 1926, and he spent most of his career working for Warner Brothers. And it's strange why his reputation is not greater than it is. It was critical reputation. I previously, on an earlier Theater Thursday, talked about one of his films, White Christmas, which is not really much to do with Christmas, but it is, one of my favorite Christmas movies, a delightful movie. Let's see. Let's look at some of the famous films, great films that Michael Curtiz made. The Adventures of Robin Hood, King Galahad, Angels with Dirty Faces, The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex the Seahawk and the Sea Wolves, Casablanca, which is many people's favorite film, Yankee Doodle Dandy, the notorious Mission to Moscow, Life with Father, the Egyptians, Sword and Sandal epic, King Creole, generally considered to be Elvis Presley's greatest film. I don't know, Michael Curtiz, he was adept in every kind of film, and you don't really see that much in people called auteurs. I guess Curtiz, he never really learned to speak English and was famous for his malapropisms. Perhaps the reason he's not really considered an auteur because he wasn't really in a position to press his own case. But if you look at the number of great or famous films that Curtiz made compared to his critical reputation, that is one of the most skewed ratios in film. Also, Curtiz was really quite a craftsman, and his films tended to have a unique look, one which is associated with the term German expressionism, particular use of strange or called Dutch angles, the use of chiaroscuro, light and dark, raising, heightened tension, a heightened reality. Actually, a lot of the movies that I have reviewed use the technique of German expressionism, and there's a reason for that, because it is so very powerful. So Mildred Pierce, screenplay is by Ronald McDonald, again from James M. Cain's novel. I've read the novel. James M. Cain, he made, he wrote several books which became famous and successful movies. The Postman Always Rings Twice, Double Indemnity being two others. Let's see. Butterfly, is that the name of it? Pia Zadora starred in a film. Yeah, that was not a success. But there are differences significant differences between the novel and the film. The novel is very much a Depression era film, and the movie novel, and the movie is not. And in the novel, Mildred's daughter Vida is even more monstrous than she is in the film. But you've seen the film, it's rather hard to believe. Now, Mildred's character in the film she's more successful than in the novel, and she is also a more noble in the film than she is in the novel. There are production code concerns, and Cain's novels were for some time thought to be unfilmable, but ways were found to film them. And one of the ways that Mildred Pierce could be made is that there's less objectionable material in the film than in the novel, although it really pushes the limit. There's also, there's more drama, overt drama. Well, I'll just mention, Chekhov's gun, which appears in Mildred Pierce near the beginning, and, the rule is kept, as one might expect. Joan Crawford, one of the greatest stars of cinema. This is a woman who had a tremendously long career and reinvented herself more than once. She had played ingenue flapper roles in the 20s and early 30s, but by the early 30s, she was in her 30s, and she started playing more mature roles. There's a phenomenon in Hollywood called box office poison, and it refers to this, that there are many people in Hollywood who get paid a lot of money for starring in movies, but then the receipts for these movies are not so good. And so they are referred to as box office poison. And so was Joan Crawford at the end of her career with MGM. And she dropped out of the industry for a couple of years and had to actually audition for the role of Mildred Pierce, which presumably, a few years earlier, she would have found just to be an outrageous demand, but she was desperate to get this role, I suppose because she knew what she could do with it, and no less than James M. Cain was thrilled by her performance and gave her a signed copy of a leather-bound edition of the novel. Jack Carson plays one of the male leads, a very attractive, handsome fellow with a long career. He's quite good in this film. He's kind of a sleazy character, but not really. And, well, he never pretends to be something that he isn't. What you see is what you get. Zachary Scott plays the other male lead, and I suppose he seems to come from the past, really, because when you see him with his hair and his pencil-thin mustache and his manners, he seems to come from the age of Rudolph Valentino. But I gather that sort of that kind of male stylization was still popular in the 1940s, although he might seem a little ridiculous to us. Eve Arden plays the main female supporting role. This is a woman who, she was a star on television, she was a star in the movies, she was a star in radio. She's a delight in everything she is in. She is the greatest wisecracking dame and of course, that since she was never really considered, a sex symbol, she gets to be more wisecracking than even of the age. Bruce Bennett plays Mildred's first husband. He won a silver medal in the Olympics in 1928. I suppose many people will remember him as one of the prospectors in the treasure of the Sierra Madre. And going back to what I was saying about 12 O'Clock High, that you see a kind of manliness in films of the 1940s that has disappeared from Hollywood now. Jack Carson's character, Wally Fay, is sort of a blithe character, but, he seems real. And Bruce Bennett, he seems like a formidable person. His character seems very much lived in. Anne Blythe plays the villainous daughter. And I don't know, she is very much, her body type, very much different than Joan Crawford's. She's quite an attractive little number with her trim little figure and bee-stung lips. The music is by Max Steiner, who scored so many great films. The cinematography is by Ernest Haller. I've talked about his work before. Of course, he did Gone with the Wind, and his cinematography is really appropriate to Scorsese's style. That is to say that the expressionism simply flows out of him. You see him. He worked with Joan Crawford in another film from Warner Brothers a year later called Humoresque. I don't know. Perhaps I'll talk about that one day. Mildred Pierce is considered to be melodramatic, but Humoresque is even more melodramatic. Not only got Joan Crawford in it, you've got John Garfield, angry young man. Humoresque was famously parodied on SCTV with the real violin virtuoso Eugene Fodor playing the John Garfield part. But I suppose to me, the greatest joy of this film is Oscar Levant is in it, and he is absolutely hilarious. Such a witty man. Now, Mildred Pierce begins, rather like Sunset Boulevard, with the end up front. But I suppose, when you watch Sunset Boulevard for the first time and you see William Holden, floating in that pool, and you think, is the movie really going to end like this? Because just because you see something portrayed at the beginning, or you're given, a certain amount of information as to what's happening, that is not necessarily how the movie is going to end. And Mildred Pierce is an example of a, did she or didn't she film. Now, this film is called a woman's film. It's called a weepy. Well, it has a strong woman in it, and it's full of strong emotions. The films by the Archers, many of them could be called weepies or women's films. Black Narcissus, a very good example, or The Red Shoes. I don't know. I prefer to consider them operatic in their emotions. So, after the initial scene out by the ocean, we're introduced to the beginning of the story, and Mildred Pierce is in a bad marriage. She's married to a man called Bert, and Bert loses his job at the real estate agency where he has been partnered with Wally Fay, and there's some sort of intimation that Wally Fay has cut him out of the business because he's a sharper operator. But Bert is he's a man who's disappointed in life, and he doesn't seem to be in any kind of hurry to get a job, and being disappointed in life, having given up on life, you can learn something from this movie. Women do not like that in men. And Mildred has high ambitions, not so much for herself, but for her daughters, particularly Vida. And we see this conflict right in the very beginning between the two daughters. And we have one daughter who is spoiled and stuck up, and later we find out to be monstrous. And then we have another daughter, who's called Kay, is an absolute delight. Although she does the hard-bitten wisecracking as well. And it's really impressive. This little girl, I don't know, must have been like about 10 or 12 years old. And she's very good at it, both at playing a tomboyish innocent and both with the hard-bitten back and forth with her sister. Mildred has a cake business, which she started up on her own. We see from the very beginning that she is an entrepreneur. And why she's doing this for Vida, they bought a piano because Vita's taking piano lessons and singing lessons, and to buy special clothes for Vida. And we find out pretty much at the beginning, right at the time that we find out that this marriage between Bert and Mildred is over, we find out that Vida is difficult to please. That she is, well, to put it otherwise, she is a nasty, ungrateful child. That Mildred has spent a lot of money out of her own pocket to buy a dress for Vida. And so she goes to try it on in the bedroom, and her sister Kay is there, and she cannot disguise her contempt. Ruffles. It has ruffles. She says, it's the dress. It's awfully cheap material. I could tell by the smell. And Case, what did you expect? Want it inlaid with gold? And Vida says, well, it seems to me if you're buying anything, it should be the best. This is definitely not the best. And Kay says, oh, quit. You're breaking my heart. As I say, Kay is a really a darling child. So Mildred is introduced to these two crises, that her husband is leaving her for Mrs. Biederhoff, although the exact nature of the relationship between her husband and this widow is never made clear, again, probably because of, the production code. And so Mildred is a single mother, and Wally shows up on the scene, and he is not wasting any time at all. He makes a play for her. He's pretty broad about it. It's not like he, jumps her on the couch. He comes pretty close to it. But again, Wally is rather admirable in that he doesn't pretend to be anything that he is. And one wonders about Mildred, that Wally's a handsome guy. Wally's a successful guy. Wally is confident. He's outgoing. He is quite kind, personally and professionally, to Mildred. So one wonders why Mildred doesn't get together with him. Well, as it turns out, she's looking for something a little grander than that. I think she probably would have been happy if she had decided to get together with Wally. But Mildred is she's at the end of the line, because she can't keep up the household now that her husband has left and is not contributing any income anyway. And so she has to get a job. And there's a lovely little montage of her tramping the streets, and being informed that, no, you have no experience. So she's exhausted, and she goes into a restaurant, and she really has no money. The hostess says the chicken is good. Well, she can't afford chicken. She can afford a cup of tea, but she says what she really wants. And there's a great scene where we see that there seems to be some trouble. Eve Arden is managing the restaurant. She's the hostess. And there seems to be some trouble. There's a shortage of waitresses getting into near fights about tips being stolen and things being, knocked over, and waitresses going in or out of the kitchen just with a tray and not carrying anything. And Mildred is a very clever woman, and she picks up on there's a need there that perhaps she could help fulfill. So, I want to be a waitress, she says. Do you know anything about it? No. And then there's all of this rather worrying detail about you'll have to buy nurse's shoes, and you'll have to buy a uniform, and how much this costs, and it comes out of your salary. It's clear it's going to be one of those situations where it's going to be a while before Mildred is actually making any money being waitressing. But of course, she has to keep this from her daughter, Vida. She's terrified of Vida. And it is sad to see. It is really sad to see. Of course, one could say, I suppose, about Mildred Pierce is that, like a lot of women, she is a bad judge of character. This is revealed again and again, but particularly with her daughter. Her daughter goes looking. There is a servant in the house played by Butterfly McQueen, and I suspect that whenever this Mildred Pierce is played on Turner Classic Movies or whatever, they're doing a lot of apologizing for her in this role. Butterfly McQueen, she had a similar role in Gone with the Wind. She played a servant there too. She's a very sweet woman, but she is stupid. And that's her character, sweet and stupid. And apparently this is considered very offensive now because, she was a black woman. I don't know. I've spoken about that before. I don't want to waste any more talking about that nonsense. But Mildred comes home from work, and she sees Lottie, the black woman's name, and she's wearing a uniform. And Mildred can barely believe it. She says to her daughter, "You've been snooping around ever since I got this job, trying to find out what it is, and now you know. You know, don't you?" And Vida says, "Know what? Know what, Mother? You knew when you gave that uniform to Lottie that it was mine, didn't you? Your uniform. Yes, I'm waiting tables in a downtown restaurant. My mother, a waitress." And just the the sense of unearned greed there. If her mother was rich, that would be one thing, perhaps. But her mother is working poor, and the money that she brings in goes largely to Vida. Vida is not grateful for this, and Vida finds out. She says, we never hear about your people. And Vida has somehow, found out about Mildred's origins, that they were quite modest, that her parents lived above the store and her mother took in washing. Well, I guess the concept of honest work Vida has never understood it, or even she's certainly never valued it. But of course, she is Mildred's daughter. But I don't know, perhaps she has one of these people who has a fantasy, that she was adopted, right? Because she's an elegant young woman who is destined for higher things. She wants money above all. Why does she want money? Vida says, with this money, I can get away with you, from you and your chickens and your pies and your kitchens and everything that smells of grease. I can get away from this shack with its cheap furniture, and this town and its dollar days, and its women that wear uniforms, and its men that wear overalls. Oh dear. But a man comes into Mildred's life. His name is Monty Barragon. And he is from some grand, or once grand, European family, settled in America, very rich. Not so rich now, probably because no one in the family seems to do anything except loaf, as Monty admits, and spend a lot of money. Monty, what you see is what you get with Monty too, to a certain extent. But you see, Monty, he's always, these self-denigrating jokes about himself. This is how he loafs, and Mildred thinks this is so charming. It's so old school. It's so European. And he's hiding in plain sight. He is telling Mildred that he is a useless parasite. But she is so dazzled by him because he's so different from Bert and from Wally, that he represents a glamour that she never thought would be part of her life. And of course, she's also thinking about Vida as well, because what if Monty became her stepfather? Well, be careful what you wish for. Wally very cleverly arranges a business arrangement for Mildred, where she takes possession of a property on the ocean, which is owned by Monty, which she's going to have to get rid of. And Mildred, no money down. No money down. Again, very clever of Wally. And Wally's thinking, I don't know, maybe Mildred will recognize my charms. Maybe she won't. Wally is clearly not missing women. There's going to be women in Wally's life. But of course, Wally recognizes from the very beginning that Monty is a worthless parasite as well. But I suppose Mildred's attitude towards that is, well, you're just jealous. Well, yeah, Wally is jealous, but the fact is that Wally knows a lot more about the world, or if you like, the relations between men and women, than Mildred Pierce does, and she pays a terrible price for her naivete. I just want to say something specific about Joan Crawford's performance. The clarity and the forcefulness of her diction are a large part of what sell this performance. And I don't want to be that guy, but I am. How I long for the days when movie stars were expected to speak strongly and clearly. Not necessarily in this, exaggerated sense, over the top. But no, Joan Crawford is really ideal in that respect. So, Mildred, she has all her dreams. She's a successful and rich businesswoman. And she has married the man of her dreams, or she's together with the man of her dreams, Monty. And but it turns out that Vida is never going to be happy so long as she's with her mother. And Monty is revealed to be a really open and obvious sponger. And there's a certain amount, of humiliation that's involved in living off a woman. Monty he's not very good about it, moping about it. I suppose that he has to ask. For the money. If Mildred had come from money, it'd probably be, a little bit different. Or if there'd been some sort of windfall in her life. But since what she has is based on her own efforts, then she knows the value of a dollar in a way that Monty doesn't, and in a way that Vida doesn't. So I was talking about the as Vida rises in the world with her newfound wealth. The clothes and the rather fabulous car, which, if you look closely, is monogrammed, and Monty's old, creepy mansion, which Mildred buys and spends God knows how much money refurnishing it. That she takes to, Vida starts to take to insulting her mother in French, which that would be hard to put up with, wouldn't it? Yes. She says to her, Monty gave me this for my birthday. I couldn't hurt him by not using it. I mean, that would be dreadfully recherché, n'est-ce pas? And deadpan Joan Crawford says, yes, I suppose so. Very, very amusing. But then we get to the nightmare stage of the film, where, of course, Monty has been spending a great deal of time with Vida. And Vida is, 17 or 18 years old at the time, and she's a very attractive woman. And, of course, a couple of decades younger than Mildred. And this sort of thing happens to women. How could this have happened? It was happening right in front of your eyes. And we see all of these scenes with Monty paying very, very close attention to this bratty young woman. Typically, men don't like spending time with bratty young women unless they have a sexual interest in them. And Monty clearly has a sexual interest in Vida. And we've seen it from the beginning. And finally, Mildred finds out. Of course, Monty's reaction is something like, well, this is awkward. I didn't expect you here at this time. And Mildred does something very wicked at the time to Wally, despite all of his kindnesses to her. And she is delivered to the police. I don't know. I mean, the business with the police is rather like it's rather like a Perry Mason episode, in that there are so many viable suspects, Oh, and there's a surprise ending. But I very much like the treatment of the police in this movie, because all of the cops outside the superintendent's door wow, they are hard-bitten. Just the most hard-bitten office cops I think I've ever seen in a movie. Whereas the superintendent, he seems to be a kind of a philosopher, very sort of a genial man. He says it's sad sometimes to have this job. The ending of the movie it's different than that of the book. It's far more ambiguous than the book. But if you know the production code, you know that there are certain rules that must be honored, and they are honored in this film. Again, I don't know why they call this, weepy or a women's film. I prefer to call it operatic. I think that it is tremendously entertaining and moving. That obviously, I suppose women would react to this film differently than I would, but I'll say this: one doesn't need to be a woman in order to be tremendously impressed and moved by Mildred Pierce's story. Oh, let's talk about the Blu-ray. It's Criterion, and it is a significant increase over the previous DVD from Warner Brothers. You can get it from Amazon.com, or it's been released by Criterion in Britain as well. The movie is 55, 75 years old, so one generally has to accept some deficiencies in the source content. But much of this film is just it's a 4K rendering. Much of it is simply outstanding in the visual presentation. But there's a lot of extras on the Blu-ray. Critics Molly Haskell and Robert Polito. You get to see Joan Crawford interviewed on the David Frost Show for 15 minutes. A 87-minute documentary, which could be from A&E, called Joan Crawford, the Ultimate Movie Star. A question and answer with Anne Blythe, and James Cain being interviewed on the Today Show for 10 minutes. A typically outstanding package from Criterion. So those are my thoughts about Mildred Pierce. Okay. Gamian says, I know everyone just whispers in monotone in movies now. What artistic skill? Steve says, going to do some loafing tonight. Well, thank you, Gandalf White, for your kind comments. Halper says, all the characters in Mildred have their own points of view and ambitions that drive them away from each other. Yeah. Double Indemnity also begins with the ending. Indeed it does. Indeed it does. And of course, there's some doubt as to, how the movie is going to end. Billy Wilder had filmed a different ending, which is a gas chamber scene. You couldn't actually show a gas chamber, back then. But, everything leading up to the gas chamber. And he just decided, it's too much. I don't need it. Because he had come up, he and Chandler had come up with the brilliant idea, which wasn't in James M. Cain's novel, of Fred McMurray narrating, his life story, or, the story of him and Barbara Stanwyck, while he's bleeding out, sitting in a chair in his office, which is a genius stroke. A genius stroke. Cain has a story called The Baby in an Icebox. I think I mentioned last week that came out in the 1980s, a volume with his three famous novels introduced by Tom Wolfe, who was quite an admirer of James M. Cain. And I was really quite surprised how good they are in the plotting, in the dialogue. Also, Cain had started as a reporter, as Tom Wolfe had. And there's a great deal of, shall we say, sociological and anthropological information in Cain's novels. Enron says, Kevin, how do you think you'd do if you were stuck on an island or apartment, Survivor style, with Joan Crawford and Betty Davis. I don't know. That's a pretty wide open question. I can't say that I ever found Betty Davis particularly attractive. You know, what, in the Petrified Forest? Maybe. In All About Eve, she is so much the grande dame. You know, that a bit de trop for me. But let's see. Ann Baxter. Oh boy. There's a woman who knew how to make the most of what she had. Ann Baxter was not a beauty, but my word, she was attractive. When you see her shimmying in the 10 Commandments in front of Pharaoh, oh baby. Of course, I always wondered about that. This is supposed to be an Easter movie, so why is Ann Baxter shimmying like that in front of us? Of course, Cecil B. DeMille, he didn't see any kind of problem with mixing the two. So, they hated each other. I don't know. I've read about this, and of course there was a movie made about this. And it could be that the feud was begun as a publicity stunt, and maybe it became real. I recall seeing Betty Davis on talk shows, in the late 60s, early 70s. I remember once Ronald Reagan was brought up, and she was cackling derisively. She seemed a very unpleasant woman. Certainly at the end of her life. I don't know if she had been like that earlier. Anyway, what is coming up on Theater Thursday? Well, let's have a look. Something a lot different. An English or an Italian new wave film filmed in English. From 1966, Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up, starring David Hemming, Vanessa Redgrave. On March 11th, a film from Ireland about the Irish police from 2011 called The Guard by John Michael McDonough. On March 18th, a lot of fun. Both Valley of the Doll movies, the original and the crazed follow-up, which was co-written by Roger Ebert. Patty Duke in the first Valley of the Dolls. I remember this is the first time I saw that. It was a real revelation to me. Yeah, she chews the scenery all right, or devours huge hunks of it, but my word, she is entertaining. And on March 25th, a film from 1967 by Jean-Luc Godard called Weekend, which is about the end of the world as we know it. And on the book club tomorrow, what am I talking about? I'm talking about a book written by the founder of the World Economic Forum, and it's about momentous events. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get into any more trouble than necessary. I'm going to do some loafing tonight. I thought you were going to say baking, all this baking. Oh, yes. Joan Crawford. One more thing about Joan Crawford. She's often cited as a gay icon or as an F something G hag. I think she fails in this because if you look at Marilyn Monroe and all the rest of them, they're not motherly figures. Can you imagine, any of these women dandling, a baby or a child on her knee? And you see that Joan Crawford in Mildred Pierce is a very motherly woman. It's not just all the, the baking. It's not just all the, the baking and the cooking and all that, but the hugging and, all of the rest of it. And you see, how genuinely distraught that she is by what happens to her children. So no, I don't think that is really appropriate for her. What was the Iranian solution is to pretend that homosexuality doesn't exist and to go with mandatory sex changes. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly appreciated at this time, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you live in Canada, a donation to this live stream can be sent directly via Interact to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuinely human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.